We're joined now by Mick Mulroy, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mick. Always a pleasure having you on the programme. We're talking obviously today about Saudi-US relations in light of the visit to Washington by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The ties go back about a century, and I wanted to start by asking you how important you think Washington views this relationship with Saudi Arabia as being.
Good to be with you again, Tom. Very important. This has a potential to be a very consequential meeting today on a variety of topics, both for the interests of Saudi Arabia, the interests of the United States, the interests of the region, of course, being the Middle East, and for the relationship going ahead with both countries. There's going to be topics on economics, diplomacy, and of course, security is what we expect today.
Okay, we're expecting some big deals as well. We'll come on to those. Let's start by looking through the US lens. What do you think Washington wants to obtain from this visit?
Well, it's clear the White House has put a lot of effort into their 20-point plan for Gaza. That requires the contributions of many countries, both for this international stabilization force that was essentially approved yesterday in the United Nations, but also the reconstruction, which will require a substantial amount of funds to do so. And that is likely going to really rely heavily on Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries. So I think for the president's plan to get a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and to move ahead with stabilizing the region, Saudi Arabia is a big player with that. Also, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, which the president has put a lot of stock in. Saudi Arabia would not only be a very consequential new join, but they would likely open the way for many other countries to join as well.
Do you think that's likely to happen anytime soon?
I don't think it's likely to happen today. I think the discussions, of course, are going to be continued. They've already started. Saudi Arabia is likely to ask for things like a clear path and a clear commitment to a Palestinian state before they would agree to normalize relationships with Israel. I think they'll also be talking about really asking the U.S. to do more to end the conflict in Sudan, which has caused the most significant humanitarian crisis in the world right now. So there's going to be several asks, I think, from Saudi Arabia to the United States if they're going to normalize relationship with Israel. But that's likely what's going to be discussed today because there's a lot of benefits the U.S. could provide to Saudi Arabia as well.
Right, and they've had a joint diplomatic win, Saudi Arabia and the United States, during these last few months in the form of Syria. And only last week, the relatively new president of Syria was in Washington and was playing basketball with US officials, and we were talking about that on this channel. Why do you think Saudi Arabia and the United States were so keen to get that relationship right with the new leadership in Syria?
Well, Tom, I mean, obviously, Syria saw an extensive, long, very bloody and destructive civil war. The new president, although he's an interim president, is saying all the right things when it comes to essentially focusing inward on the development of his own country and the prosperity of his own people, all people in Syria, and less on, obviously allowing Iran and Russia to have a platform in Syria like the Assad regime. There's a lot of benefits for the United States to make sure that the interim government succeeds in Syria, but also for the region. Israel, of course, would not have to be so concerned about what is Iran doing in Syria if they were excluded from Syria. And Saudi would like to see that as well. They, I think, pushed President Trump to meet with al-Shura in the White House, and that happened. And I think they will be very much supporters of the further development of Syria, which could be very important, not just for security, but there's things such as the pipeline that could come out of the Middle East and go to Europe, would have to go through Syria, a gas pipeline that would help Europe come off of Russian energy, for example, huge economic benefits to the region to include Syria. There's a lot to discuss between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia on the future of Syria that's really would benefit not only the people of Syria, but the region's stability.
Yeah, another thing that might have changed perceptions about the region's stability was the Israeli strike on Qatar in September of this year. I'm wondering how much of a game changer you think that was to perceptions on the Arabian Peninsula about security.
I think that was a very significant event for not only the views in the region toward Israel's willingness to strike. In that case, it was the negotiation team for Hamas, which was there at the request of those pushing for a ceasefire, to include the United States. In fact, it was the U.S. proposal that was being considered by Hamas when they were targeted. And I think it really sent a shockwave not only to the leadership in Qatar, of course, but around the region, and likely led to this above major non-NATO allied status defense cooperation agreement between the United States and Qatar that is very unique, not just in the region, but around the world, without an actual treaty. And I think that that sparked an interest in Saudi Arabia to get something similar. And by all reports, they're going to ask the United States for something similar to this language, which is very similar to the language of Article 5 in the NATO treaty, to be given to them as well. And that might be a big, big carrot for Saudi Arabia to do things like actively consider joining the Abraham Accords in support for reconstruction in Gaza.
And actually, Mick, just looking back on what's happened the last couple of months, it wasn't long after the Israeli strike on Doha that Saudi Arabia signed a defense deal with Pakistan. And I was wondering how you think that was interpreted by Washington. Do you think Saudi Arabia was perhaps sending out a message?
Quite possible. There's been a lot of concern by our partners and allies about the way the U.S. now views even historical treaties like NATO and like the treaties we have in the far Indo-Pacific. And I think they looked to Pakistan, obviously a nuclear-capable, nuclear country, as a clear defense mechanism for themselves. That might have sent a message to Washington. Certainly the message that Qatar said clearly is we're going to need some serious guarantees if we're going to continue hosting your largest U.S. airbase in the Middle East in Al Udeid. And we're going to be targeted not only by Israel, but by Iran. If you remember, that was the case as well. And I think Saudi Arabia wants to see the same level of commitment. And based on all the requests that the United States and, of course, the historical ties between the U.S. and Saudi, it's likely to happen. But that, of course, is going to cause a domino effect. And other good partners in the region are going to look for that as well.
Okay, and just lastly, there is a 1,000-strong Saudi delegation now in Washington. And there is, of course, this summit tomorrow, this business forum, the US-Saudi Business Forum. What sort of deals, I mean, in what sorts of sectors will you be looking out for most, Mick?
I think it's going to be across the spectrum, really. Certainly in the high tech and the AI industry, there's a lot of discussion on that. That, of course, plays across all levels of economics and security. There'll be a discussion, of course, on the desire of Saudi Arabia to purchase, I think it's 48 F-35s. That will be the first non-Israeli country in the Middle East to get that. Of course, there'll be a lot of discussion on from the defense industry on what else Saudi would be interested in purchasing. It's really going to be a substantial event. And I imagine people from across the spectrum of business are going to be there and trying to, again, further the economic ties between the kingdom and the United States.
And what about those F-35 fighter jets that President Trump said will be sold now to Saudi Arabia? How significant would that be?
So I think it will be a very significant decision. He said yesterday in questions in the Oval Office unrelated to this event, but after another event, that he had decided to sell these F-35s to Saudi Arabia. So if that's the case, there is something called essentially requiring the United States to ensure the qualitative military edge of Israel in any decisions when it comes to defense assistance overseas. So this has to be viewed in that light. It's a self-imposed law, of course, on the United States. But I think they've already made that determination if the president's announcing that the sale is going to happen. So it will be controversial to some in the Senate, and there's certain ways they can put holds on it. But right now, at least from the executive branch of the United States, it looks like it's cleared to happen, which will be a significant advantage for Saudi Arabia and largely cause other countries, again, just like the Security Pact itself, to start asking the United States, why not us, such as the UAE, for example.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Really appreciate you speaking to us. Mick Mulroy, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Thank you very much indeed for your time.